Okay, so welcome back to the channel. It's been a while since I posted anything, and a lot has happened. So let me bring you up to date, and then I'd also want to talk about where I plan to go from here. Um, in late April of this year, 2016, while I was teaching a fencing class, I ended up injuring my knee. And after about a week, I went to the doctors and found out that I'd torn my meniscus. I had a medial meniscus tear that required me to get some x-rays and CAT scans and ultimately surgery. And I had my meniscus repair surgery on May 31st. Up until then, I couldn't, I was unable to fence. And of course, after that, I was told that it would be 6 weeks before I was allowed to really do any exercises, including fencing, other than some fairly limited physical therapy exercises. Um, well, the problem for me there was that I had already planned to go to Combat Con and compete in rapier, single stick, and sword and buckler. So I disregarded my doctor's advice and I went to Combat Con. In fact, today is Tuesday, July 12th. I got back from Combat Con yesterday, July 11th. And the good news is I went to Combat Con, I fought in a single stick tourney, and I fought in the rapier tourney. I decided to skip the sword and buckler tourney. And I ended up winning gold medals in both single stick and rapier. My first time out, my first time there, and my first Hema event. So I was understandably very excited, very stoked, and very proud about that. But more importantly, I had a chance to go to Combat Con, which is one of the large Hema events in the United States, in North America really. I think only Long Point, to my knowledge, is bigger, although it might be similar in size to a couple other ones. But in any event, it was a large tournament, and it was populated almost exclusively by Hema practitioners. And so I got to meet a lot of people that are outside, that fight and compete outside the space that I'm used to, which is the Society for Creative Anachronism. So, my thoughts on Combat Con, which I should hasten to add, consists not only of Hema fighting and tournaments, but also vendors, cosplay, and a lot of classes, a lot of martially based classes taught by some of the best instructors available. But my primary focus was the tournaments. It's an international tournament. There are people from outside the United States. Obviously, that's what international means. And my first thought is I got to meet a lot of new people that I would have never met, and just wonderful people. Everybody was very friendly, very inviting, and really very cool. There were a number of large Hema clubs from the Western United States represented there. The tournament takes place in Las Vegas, Nevada, so I flew in from Cleveland. And I got to meet people from Kron, from Blood and Iron, from the Phoenix Society, and they were there in great numbers, and a lot of them were competing. I ended up kind of gravitating towards a loose affiliation of people. We started referring to ourselves tongue-in-cheek as the non-aligned or the unclaimed, or whatever goofy sci-fi name we could come up with. But it was all people who, like myself, had either never been there before or had been to Combat Con before but had never competed. And they were just great people, and I'm looking forward, frankly, to seeing all of them again. In particular, I met some great people out of Seattle, David and Matt, and some great guys out of and girls out of Albuquerque, New Mexico, that I'm hoping someday soon I can get down to Albuquerque and actually train with them, because I really enjoyed their company and I thought they were just great. But so everybody was very, very friendly and very inviting, and it was really a nice environment. It was also very competitive. And I will say, unsurprisingly, that people within their own schools were, of course, aggressively rooting for people from their own schools, which is kind of as it should be. But I bring that up only to say, if you decide to go to Combat Con, and I'll tell you right now, I encourage you to do so, just be prepared for the fact that there's going to be a lot of people. You may feel a little outnumbered, a little overwhelmed, and you may feel that the crowd is rooting for your opponent if you're not from one of these large schools, and they are, and that's okay, because at the end of the day, it doesn't mean that they want you to leave or they're not happy you're there. But in any event, it was a great experience. I want to talk a little bit about the difference between that Hema tournament and what I'm used to in the SCA. In the SCA, we use an honor system of blow calling. So if I'm struck by my opponent, I tell him whether it was good or not and where I was struck. And it's got a social aspect that prevents people from abusing the system. In other words, if you establish yourself as someone who's not going to take blows correctly, your reputation precedes you, and after a while it becomes not a real friendly place for you to be. And so by social pressure itself, usually the problems rein themselves in. In contrast, Hema competitions are point-based fighting systems. In particular, single stick and rapier that I competed in, the fights would last up to 90 seconds. Timeouts were called to discuss blows and scoring. And different parts of the body were accorded different values for points based upon where you were struck and whether you were struck with a cut or a stab or a slice, etc. It leads to a very aggressive style of fighting compared to, again, what I'm used to the SCA fighting. In SCA fighting, it's usually one pass, and whoever loses has lost. That's it. In contrast, in these point tournaments, you'll have multiple passes and multiple chances to fight. And as the goal is to accrue more points faster than your opponent, the fighting tends to be a little more focused on the offensive rather than the defensive. However, if the parties get to a dead heat or a sudden death match where the next valid blow decides it, then you'll see people stressing more the defensive. Just something to keep in mind. It was an interesting contrast to what I'm used to. Also, these tournaments are not based on an honor system. They're based on adjudged points from judges that'll watch your bouts and call the blows. You are allowed to decline points if you think you did not earn a point against your opponent. But you cannot argue a point that's awarded against you. And this is a very interesting environment, and particularly in the faster competition forums, it can be very challenging. I'll say this, judging has got to be probably the hardest thing you can do at a Hema tournament. The judge's job is thankless. It's really hard. And there's stuff judges are going to miss. And this is something you've got to accept if you're going to go into one of these point-based, adjudicated tournament styles. In my case, for example, no less than 3 times during the entirety of my competition, I either scored a blow on my opponent that the judges didn't see and therefore didn't call, or in a couple cases, I not only scored a blow on my opponent, but did not have a blow scored upon myself, but I still had a blow called against me, and had points awarded against me, even though I knew that I had in fact not been touched. But you don't have the ability to say, I dispute that, that's not correct. In contrast, as I mentioned, you do have the ability to call back points. And so several times when I struck my opponent late or with what I thought was an insufficient blow, then I had the ability to decline the point. But again, that's just something you've got to be prepared for. The judging may not be perfectly accurate because you've got judges that are perfectly human. And if you're not, my advice, to the extent that you can take a lesson away from this episode, my advice is, if you're going to go to an adjudicated point-based Hema tournament and you're not used to it, make sure you're prepared for what you're getting yourself into. If you're a person who can't abide those kind of mistakes, then frankly, I wouldn't trouble yourself. If you have a short fuse, if you rail against missed shots, that's probably not the environment for you. I suspect it's going to lead to a lot of heartache, problems, and outright anger. So probably not the option for you. But I had a great time. I've made a lot of new friends. And I've been invited, expressly invited, and in fact directed to come back by many people, and that may or may not happen. But It was a great opportunity to compete, and one of the things that I was very happy about is it gave me an opportunity to introduce some Hema people that maybe didn't have a lot of interactions or maybe didn't have favorable interactions with people from the SCA to somebody from the SCA, and I think I made an impact with my victories in single stick and rapier that I hope will result in some additional bridges being built between Hema and the SCA. And frankly, I guess in closing, I had a really nice conversation with a wonderful young lady on Sunday, and what we were talking about was the theme of, you know, people tend to get entrenched in, I do Hema, or I do the SCA, or I do LARP, or I do sport fencing. And my opinion, for what it's worth, is there's no reason you can't have a foot in every one of these camps and enjoy yourself. If you enjoy it, do it. I'm frankly flabbergasted by people that poo-poo this idea of, you know, Hema is the one true way, the SCA is the one true way, or sport fencing is the one true way. We're all doing something that is, frankly, a somewhat geeky hobby. It's a skill that's outdated, and while it builds, you know, physical prowess, timing, I think it builds character, it's not a skill that we're going to be employing in day-to-day life. It's not as valuable as, say, accounting or being a physician. And I think that's something we shouldn't lose sight of, is this is a skill that we're doing because we enjoy it, it's fun, we think it's very cool. And as a result, there's really no reason for you to look down your nose at something someone else does for fun. Whether it's LARP, whether it's sport fencing, whether it's the SCA or Hema, or whether it's Pokemon Go. Let people do what they want to do. Try it out if you haven't tried it before. If it's not for you, move on. But try to avoid that tendency that frankly I'm starting to see growing more in the different disparate groups, to look down your nose at anything that isn't your pet hobby. So, long-winded update, but that's what's been going on. Going forward, I've got a lot of stuff to populate this channel with now that I can actually fence again and demonstrate some things. So you can look forward to some more short videos on techniques for winning tournaments and my thoughts on other aspects of the martial culture. In the meantime, if you have any questions, comments, etc., put them in the comments below. If you have any suggestions about things you'd like to see, videos you'd like to see, techniques you'd like to talk about, put them in the comments and I'll see what I can do to accommodate you. But until next time, thanks for tuning in.